Chapter 17. The Hallelujah Strand. From the surroundings in which I move, I am so conscious of the value of character built upon accurate information that a strong desire prompts me to linger over every detail of my narrative, lest I miss some apparent triviality upon which a mighty issue should afterwards be found to hang. But my difficulty lies in the certain fact that upon every point I am constrained to mention, almost infinite possibilities are centered. The germ life in a single grain of wheat is inestimable. Life knows no such differentiation as greater and lesser. These distinctions apply only to its powers of selection and assimilation, controlling growth and production. One grain draws from the sustenance upon which it feeds and thrives from one source, another from another, and where all have to be equally provided for, duty demands that all shall be considered. This is the terribly startling truth we can never lose sight of. It is this that makes me so frequently reiterate that with us there is nothing small or great, or perhaps I should rather say, everything is great and nothing small. Every suggestion I use is weighted with inestimable significance because I speak of truth and would gladly tarry to open every seed I scatter and show the potential value of its contents. But my duty is to sow and leave the increase to the future and to God. Still, I wish I could sow my thoughts with a pen of living fire, so they might burn and bury themselves deep in the lives of all to whom I speak. Under the most favorable conditions, the law of growth is a wearily slow process, and when we look back to ascertain honestly how much we have already accomplished of our pilgrimage towards God, we tremble to speculate as to how long it will take us to reach perfection. The powers of God repose in the nature of God, but we find little of them in ourselves at present. It is the continual recurrence of this fact as I look back from my higher vantage ground that would make me pause, but duty calls me forward, and I must needs obey. As an illustration that it is simply an environment, and not the soul, that is changed in the process of discarnation, I may very usefully here introduce the awakening of our little dandy. It is a case of peculiarly marked characteristics, well exhibiting many of the definite points of interest respecting which earth is somewhat anxiously doubtful. It was also the first occasion upon which I had watched the process from both sides, and I was therefore especially desirous to trace how much was remembered and how much forgotten before the little fellow touched the point of recollection, where all would become perfectly clear to his memory. Villon notified me of the impending event, and when I arrived, I found Elil, the poetess, whose acquaintance we have already made, who was present with Jack as the nearest friend to offer the first congratulations. Dandy was still sleeping peacefully, but what an astonishing change had taken place in his appearance since we last saw him. The pinched and haggard look had passed away, and in its place we saw the rounded, healthy face of a well-developed lad. There was the suspicion of a smile playing around his mouth, and a kind of nervous tremor, as if his naturally vivacious precocity was impatient to exercise itself in new and more favorable surroundings. In the days of the past, the preternatural humor of the lad had been mercifully granted as an offset to hardship and suffering, and in his sleep he already seemed to understand or anticipate that he was about to wake and find the shadow had passed away, leaving the sunshine with a brighter sparkle than he had known before. I looked from the sleeper to Jack, who was actively impatient for his friend to open his eyes and learn that his one great wish had been actually granted. In Jack, I saw the first fruits of Alil's devoted training. His still, mobile character had yielded splendidly to the molding of her Christ-like mind, and the lad in every way represented the possible transformation paradise can effect by its system of adaptive culture. It was only a crude block of individuality Arvez carried to her home when I first met her, but Alil had worked upon it with skill and genius until the outline of the angel form could already be fairly well discerned. Ah, this divine study of soul sculpture is glorious work indeed. From Jack my eyes wandered to his instructress, whose face shone with the soft glow of one of her faraway contemplations. But at the moment she raised her head, and our eyes met. "Is it not beautiful," she inquired, "to watch the unfolding of such treasures in the garden of the Lord?" I wish it were possible clearly to understand the whole of the beauty," I replied. "As it is, we lose so much because we can appreciate so little. I have given up the idea of ever being able to understand the all. My cup runneth over, and I try to be satisfied if I can add to the sweetness of my life's contents some new, if only faint, idea of the music contributed by each new experience." "Can you be satisfied?" I asked. "No, no, I think mine must be a very restless, daring, aspiring soul." Then, with one of her meditative outstretches of reverence, she added, "And yet it is not that so much as God's great love, and yet it is not that so much as God's great love drawing me ever nearer to Him at a rate that refuses to allow my slowly expanding soul to keep pace with His wonderful developments. O Ephrar, who is able to understand this incomprehensible life into which you and I are but just unfolding? I wish you would grant me an opportunity of speaking to you on these things," I ventured to ask, encouraged by her inquiry. "In your earth life you were so active in the cause of the Master, whereas I scarcely gave a disinterested thought to him. I see my error now, and when I hunger to know so much of him, I know of no one, save perhaps Mayanin, who could help me, as you might do." "Come home with me when our little friend awakes," she answered, "and we will help each other to understand more of the Father's love than we know at present." "Yes, I will gladly come and thus gratify another of my long-deferred desires." "Is that really so?" And a softly indeterminable smile lighted her face as she spoke. "The pleasures of his service are more than passing sweet, especially where the ministry is so personally remunerative." Then Shakespeare spoke by inspiration when he said that mercy, quote, "is twice blessed. It blesses him that gives and him that takes." End quote. "It must needs be so with all the gifts of God," she replied. "They exhale a blessing on every receptive soul they pass." As she spoke, Mayanin with a company of attendants arrived to give the lad a welcome from the hardships he had so patiently and unselfishly borne. No longer was the benign young ruler dressed in the neutral robe he wore when last I saw him, but in the magnetic chorale back to life. But in the resplendent raiment with which he came to kiss those sleepers in the magnetic chorale back to life. He had again the self-same office to perform, and with more than a royal welcome, awakened a soul whose body earth had already hurried, unnoticed and unwept, into a pauper's grave. "Carry him hence, at the public cost, bury, dissect him, or do as you may. Nobody knows him, no one will miss him, homeless and friendless. Take him away." Back to the death vale, hidden by shadows, angels were waiting in regions of light, anxiously waiting to bid him good morning, who passed from the earth without a good night. Such was actually the difference in the conditions of the lad between ignorance and knowledge, humanity and divinity. Values at sight are not always faultlessly accurate. Tell a connoisseur the name and subject of an old master, and he will fairly estimate its real value in hundreds or thousands. But the ignorant boor will turn disdainfully from the dirty canvas for which he would not give 5 shillings. Just so, in the merchandise of souls, the highly colored St. Dives is hung on the line in most favorable light, even in a church exhibition, while Lazarus is left to the care of the dogs. Poor Dives